Uh, Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you to the webinar today, which is on effective communications. Our president this evening has not been able to join because of internet connectivity issues. And I would now take a minute to explain to you what NISMIT is all about. NISMIT is an organization which was started about 3 decades ago and was mainly into the areas of security, safety, management, and applied technology. It has now graduated on to being more of a think tank and a research organization in these areas that we were dealing in earlier. The president of the organization is Mr. Sipal Singh, who's a former police officer. We are missing him today because of the area where he stays in Chandigarh is been cut off with the internet. But Mr. Sipal Singh is a senior police officer from the Indian Police Service. And he was the first person who raised the Rapid Action Force in India, and he was its first chief. And he also raised the Internal Security Academy in Mount Abu, Rajasthan, in India. During his service, he's been decorated with all the good medals that the government of India can sort of honor a person with. And he's been awarded after his retirement as the best security personality of the year by the President of India. Today, the subject is of great importance because clearly communications is something that we use every day in our life, whether we are communicating with the children, whether we are communicating with our siblings or with our parents or with our wife. Everywhere communication is important. When you go to work, you need to communicate. What you want, you need to communicate. Your body language, your facial expression, everything makes a difference to the way we are and the way we wish to communicate ourselves. Even the spoken language in one country differs from another. Between the United States English and the English in the United Kingdom, the lift and elevators are different. So you have different words meaning different things in different countries. We had Leroy Cook to speak with us from the US, but he too is having some internet difficulties. And so I will now introduce the first speaker of the day, that is Sheila Ponoswamy. Sheila is actually from Singapore, but she's chosen to be in Australia. Sheila is an excellent communicator. Her written and spoken skills are excellent, which she has used to advantage in her family business. She's in the service industry and has succeeded in propelling her family business internationally and mastered the art of making people understand her in nearly all parts of the world. Besides English, she speaks Chinese and a bit of Burmese. She has been the president of the Council of International Investigators in the year 2014 and 15. She has been featured in many magazines, interviewed on television in Australia and Singapore. She has presented papers at the Australian Risk Management Institute. And now she's here to talk to us on communications. Over to you, Sheila.
Wow.
Leroy Cook is here.
Oh, Leroy is there? Okay, I'll take him on later after Sheila's spoken there.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction, Mr. Pawan. Good evening and good afternoon to everyone. I guess in the words of Mother Teresa, they say that kind words can be short and easy to speak, but the echoes are truly endless. So thank you so much for the very warm welcome. 20 years ago, many of us may have heard of a book by John Gray that came out, Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, and it took the world by storm. And everyone was fascinated by the differences in how men and women communicate and how this impacts in our relationships and ultimately our happiness. So I guess if you reflect on it, it is true that the quality of our communication will ultimately impact on the quality of our life. And these are not my words, they're truly the words of Anthony Robbins, the motivational guru, the one that wrote, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he said that. And we all know that communication is such an integral part of our life. And often we do take it for granted. And we assume that people will perceive what we say the way we intend for it to mean. The reality is, though, that our perceptions are actually shaped by our backgrounds, our experiences, and our values. And sometimes what we transmit is actually not being received by the listener the way we'd like them to understand the message. And that is where miscommunication arises. So let me give you an example, okay? If you're a manager and you say to someone, "Why are you always late for work? I really want to know." You might get a very response. By the question itself, a man may perceive this as, oh, he's going to give me a sack. However, a woman coming, if that question comes from a manager, who might perceive this question very differently and think, oh, my manager cares and really wants to help because he really wants to know why I'm late for work. Now, research will show that a man is likely to express a report style of communication. So he would respond by saying, oh, actually, the reason why I'm late is because I have problems with my car and I have to get my car fixed, and that would solve the problem. Whereas a woman now, she would focus, I guess, on creating a rapport, and she would, come up with, oh, you know what? Thank you very much for asking. We are struggling a lot with our finances lately, and, our car is really giving us problems. But we do need to get it fixed, and it looks like I may have to take up a second job, and I wonder how we're going to manage it because Jim is already working long hours. So it looks like I will have to take up the second job, but I'm so tired all the time. So as you can tell, a man would say it like, in a lot fewer words, and women would double the time to say exactly the same thing. Now, even though for a man, it might perceive that she's complaining, she's actually trying to be helpful because she wants to, help her husband in, getting a second job. But he doesn't get that. And then he thinks that, she's just being insulting and saying that he's useless, he cannot get his car fixed. And then he gets very upset with her. And of course, then later she gets upset with him because she feels that she's not being appreciated and he's being very ungrateful. So, that's an example of how miscommunication can occur because we all have different perceptions. And then again, coming from our roles and our background. And in a work situation, for instance, with the feedback given, a male manager might understand this as, oh, okay, we seem to have staff, who've got car problems. So we need to recruit more staff who are not dependent on in their cars to get to work. Whereas a female manager will see it as, we really need to change our work schedule to offer more flexibility for our staff. So obviously I'm stereotyping here, and not all men and women are the same, but often issues like these do arise. In preparation for this talk, I did a bit of reading and I made some interesting observations. And these are the observations that I actually like to share with the group. So generally, what I found is that effective communication consists of, a number of elements, and interestingly, all of them actually start with the letter C. So I guess categorizing it this way, what I found is that to be effective in communicating our thoughts, we need to be able to complete and convey the facts, taking into the account the mindset of the receiver. When I say facts, I mean that whatever that we discuss needs to have the head, the body, and the tail. And this is especially important in a work situation, that even if someone knows what the situation is, you still need to set the context, the purpose of communication, what you intend to achieve out of it, and state the facts as it is. For instance, if you want to explain about a missing file, that was left on your table, you then have to say this to your management. When I left for work, I left the file on my table. No one was around when I left for home last night. This morning I came in and it's gone. And I am a great believer, even though people say that I do talk a lot, but actually I am a great believer of keeping things concise. And I call that the KISS approach. Keep it simple. Because you can give a lot of background information, and you can go through all these emotional lamentations and bring in too many factors that are not necessary and can cause a lot of misunderstanding. For instance, you might say, I should have put the file in my drawer. Do you think so and so took it? I was so tired. Oh, but I noticed that this person Jim, he's been hovering over me when I write my report. Do you think he took my file? So on and so forth. And that's actually not necessary, because all you want to talk about and ask is what happened to your missing file. So bringing in a lot of the emotions when you're explaining a situation is probably not necessary, and it avoids a lot more misunderstanding if we use the KISS approach. And I guess the other thing is also to have consideration, which means that we have empathy. We put ourselves in the other person's shoes when we speak with them. And I guess using the words of someone wise, the Dalai Lama, he always says, think before you speak. Think, ask yourself, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? Is it kind? So before we say anything, sometimes we just can't take back what we say. I guess we have to think first before we speak, and decide if whatever that we say is going to be helpful, if it's going to hurt another party. Then of course there is clarity. Language is also very important. For instance, when we're conducting interviews, we always try to use the local native speaker for the person to express in the language that they're speaking, so that they can fully express themselves. And with clarity, also another important tool is also active listening. And this is actually very difficult, because it is often those unspoken words that provide the answers to what we're seeking. When you talk, you're already repeating what you already know, but when you listen, you may learn something new. So, and often I think a lot of management gurus like Peter Drucker, they actually say that in communication, it is actually to hear what is not being said. So effective communication is actually 20% of what we already know, and 80% of what we actually feel that we already know. But to actually have some clarity, we also need to look at body language, tones. And this is so important when someone says, no, I didn't do it, or, it didn't happen. But from the better body language and the tone, you can sense fear, or you can sense, great discomfort that, they may not be actually speaking the truth. And that's hard, active listening, and something I think that all of us, need to work on and learn. The other element we came up with is in communicating, we need to actually communicate information that is concrete, and that is to have the solid facts. And especially when you are, saying something of importance that can impact on someone's life, is to make sure that you get your who, what, when, and why. Get that all right and get the facts right. Because if you don't and you are just passing on information, that can be the root of a lot of misunderstanding. The next C would be basic courtesy. And I think in any situation, in any communication, this is so important. We need to be respectful even in a conflict situation. And then, of course, there is also correctness. To me, okay, the freedom of expression does not mean that we can say whatever we want without any responsibility for the consequences of what we're saying. So when we express ourselves, we need to consider the situation, the environment, and the group dynamics. There are obviously some topics that will have to be off limits, in a professional setting. You do not, want to share the same information with your business associates as you do with your friend, for instance. And I always feel that diplomacy and tact is so essential. And that is why we notice that in many association forums, subjects like religious ideology, political affiliations are not discussed because a moderator is actually needed. And sometimes people just cannot agree to disagree. So I went through, I think, about 7 elements of C. I had complete, we have to complete what we say, convey the facts, be concise, use the KISS approach, keep it simple, have consideration, have empathy, have clarity, be concrete in whatever information that we wish to impart, be courteous, and also to consider the correctness of what we're saying. And of course, there is, I guess, a certain amount of innate element of, how men and women process information. But essentially, I think communication is actually a learned behavior. Most of us might be self-conscious, but this can be overcome when we feel empowered. And to me, essentially, actions always speak louder than words. And this learned behavior is a continuous process as we interact and we socialize. And today we have different modes of communication. So we also have to learn, for instance, the didacarum when we use technology to communicate what is on our minds, for instance, when we write a blog or a Twitter. We need, I guess, to learn how to communicate effectively because it touches various aspects of our lives. And our happiness is actually up to us. But I am a great believer that a smile is an effective communication tool, and you can never go wrong when you start with that. So with that, I will end my presentation here and hand over the time to the next speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you so much. And before I introduce Leroy, I would like to thank the participants who are on the on YouTube at this point of time. We have participants who are coming in from India, the United States, Singapore, Pakistan, UAE, Bangladesh, Canada, France, Italy, Poland, Saudi Arabia, Senegal, and Spain. So it's an audience which is from various parts of the world. And I'd now like to introduce Mr. Leroy Cook, who is from Phoenix, Arizona, in the United States. I have known Leroy for since I think 1986, 87. Leroy is a licensed private investigator in Phoenix, Arizona. He has worked for over 50 years with attorneys. Before the World Wide Web came in, he founded and operated an organization called Investigators Online or something, ION. Investigators Anywhere, introducing hundreds of investigators to online technology and vetting and connecting them with clients worldwide for about 15 years. In addition to his knowledge of the law and investigations, he is an expert on MTBI, which stands for mild traumatic brain injuries. His experience includes 9 years as an insurance adjuster, 15 years as an Alaskan bush pilot, flight instructor, and personal travel in over 50 countries. So, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Leroy Cook, an expert communicator.
Thank you, Pawan. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Terrific. Murphy's Law is always lurking, and it bothered us this morning with a little technical problem, but it's good to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity. Effective communication for success and a happy life. That's our topic. If I talked for 20 hours instead of 20 minutes, I would barely scratch the surface of this topic. To scratch the surface is an idiom we use in the US, which means to only accomplish a small portion of a task. Idioms are one of the things I will explain and talk about today. Using another idiom, I want to be sure everyone is on the same page, which means I want everyone to start from the same place. And to make that happen, here's my understanding of the terms used in the topic. Number one, to be effective means successful in producing a desired or intended result. For this, we need to have an intended result, a goal. My goal is to help you improve your effectiveness as an international communicator. Communication is defined as the imparting or exchanging of information, or to say it in a different way, reaching others with a message. Success, that's the accomplishment of a goal, an aim or a purpose. Including success as part of the topic reinforces the necessity of continuously having goals and of knowing the intended result of our actions. Without clear goals, there is a high risk of unintended consequences, and recognizing that possibility before making decisions is a key to success. It helps avoid not only communication problems, but problems in all of life. Because the last part of the topic, a happy life, is even more subjective than success, I can only give you some food for thought, which is another idiom, and my opinion of what a happy life is. I have to leave the goal of achieving a happy life up to you. Success and a happy life are always works in progress, and no one can succeed for you. In the United States, most of us know the buck stops with me, meaning my success is up to no one except me. My idea of a happy life is having positive emotions about the present, the past, and the future, and using our strengths and abilities in the service of something larger than ourselves. On the subject of success and having a happy life, I congratulate the founders of NISMAT for their vision and efforts. They are attacking the problem of international communication head on. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of my knowledge and hopefully help others in their search for success and a happy life. I urge you to write down anything I mentioned which needs clarification and email me with your questions or requests for clarification. This is the old-fashioned way of doing a slide, and that's my email address, leroycookid@gmail.com. Since I can't cover all the variables, by stressing the complexity of international communications, I can hopefully stimulate some new world thinking. We each live in our own world, or possibly our 2 or 3 worlds. Effective communication depends on many variables specific to the social world we live in. I'm not referring to the big world, Mother Earth. One way the dictionary defines a world is people having a particular thing or common activity in common. There is a world of investigation, the world of science, the world of business, the world of aviation, the English-speaking world, the marine world, the military world, etc. Even with English as a common language, each of these worlds has its own special vocabulary and communication idiosyncrasies. We can control some variables, like our goals and the words and exhibits we use, but our effectiveness depends more on the other person's goals than on our words or goals. Here's an example. My goal might to be impress you by using big words and talking a long time and using formulas, or it might be to help you become a better communicator. 2 different goals. If your goal is to earn a certificate to display on your wall, either of my alternative goals would be effective. If, however, your goal is to become a more effective communicator, especially internationally, only the second described goal could be effective. To help remind you of some of the things to watch for in communication, here are some other acronyms and idioms used commonly in the United States. One of the most important is an acronym to remind us of what others are usually interested in when we are attempting to communicate with them. It is WIFM, W-I-F-M, which stands for What's in it for me? You always have to realize that's what the other person is really thinking about. The medium used to communicate is an important variable. An attempt at humor, which would have gotten a laugh face to face, can easily be misinterpreted and offend someone in an email. I've certainly learned that the hard way, and possibly you have also. This new Zoom way of communicating a message has advantages and disadvantages. An advantage is we can all participate without leaving our homes or offices. A disadvantage is most of us have not met each other, and we know almost nothing about each other. I don't know who you are, where you are, or what you are. You might be a man or a woman, old or young, formerly educated or educated by the school of hard knocks. Because I don't know much about you, I'm shooting from the hip. The 2 expressions I just used, the school of hard knocks and shooting from the hip, are idioms used in the US. Because idioms are not usually taught in language classes or schools, I'll introduce you to several of them along with some acronyms. I am talking about communication instead of trying to teach you how to communicate. You already know how to communicate, but hopefully this presentation will help you communicate even more effectively. If you've been communicating internationally for years, you might already know the things I mentioned. If so, I apologize, because I'll be defining and explaining terms, expressions, and acronyms for those not already aware of how large and diverse the world is and how complex and difficult effective international communication can be. An idiom is a group of words established by usage with a meaning different from the meaning of the words individually. For example, shoot from the hip does not involve using a weapon. It means to start without careful preparation and a clear plan. The school of hard knocks is not a place. It means informal education learned by experience. Here are a few more idioms for fun. We say it's raining cats and dogs. That has nothing to do with small pets falling from the sky. In the US, it means it's raining very hard. The idiom, To see the light has nothing to do with finding a source of brightness. It means to finally understand something. All over the map describes a presentation or a person who does not stick to the main topic and goes off on tangents or goes down rabbit holes, which is a new idiom I've heard recently. To blow off steam means to express anger or frustration. To get the hang of it means to figure out how to do a good job. And the saying, "I didn't just fall off of a pumpkin truck," has nothing to do with pumpkins or a truck. It means I'm not a novice or a newcomer. I can figure this out. Keep me in the loop means to stay in contact, keep me informed. And to ruffle someone's feathers has nothing to do with a bird or a chicken. It means to make someone angry or upset. There are probably idioms used in India, but not in the US, and some used in the US, but not in India. Some are only used in a specific region of a country, like saying, "Y'all come on back, you hear?" in the southern US, instead of saying, "Please come again," as they would do in the rest of the country. You can see how some idioms might make you wonder what someone is really talking about. Besides idioms, you should be aware of acronyms used. Some acronyms stand for rules worth knowing. For example, as a speaker, I should attempt to convey only one thing clearly in a presentation. But when I finished this presentation, I will have been all over the map. And that's from an idiom meaning not focused. It will seem as if I wasn't focused because I'm intentionally breaking a speaking rule which Sheila already talked about, known as the KISS principle. KISS is an acronym meaning keep it short and simple. Keep it short and simple. Between friends, and when you know you can get away with it, you can say, "Keep it short, stupid." I wouldn't suggest that, especially internationally if you don't know the rest of the people. Acronyms are an abbreviation formed by combining the first letters of other words to form a new word. With 20 minutes to fill, I'll be breaking the KISS rule because in today's world of 15-second sound bites, 20 minutes is a long time. Effective communication might seem simple, but it is not. It's very complex, especially when speaking to or with people from different cultures and having different native languages. Idioms and acronyms should be avoided when possible, and they should be explained when they are used. Don't take things for granted. As I mentioned earlier, in English, especially American English, if it's not your first language, write down anything I mention which you are not familiar with. If I didn't clarify it, you will be able to look it up later on your own or ask me for clarification in an email to Leroy Cook, LeroyCookID@gmail.com. I'm not telling you how to communicate or giving you a bunch of easy success rules. My goal is to leave you with a new appreciation for the complexity of effective international communication and the importance of learning everything you can about the many variables affecting your communications. The words we used are the most important variables. They should be chosen considering both the goals of the speaker and the listener and the medium being used. Words and expressions used effectively when speaking face-to-face might not be effective in writing a printed document, over the telephone, or in an email, or in a text message. Here are some more variables which can enhance or reduce the effectiveness of your communication. Face-to-face or remote from each other, like we are now. Voice only via phone or recording, or video and voice, like Zoom. The age of the participants, and I'll speak more on this in a moment. Speaking accents, regional or national. Speaking accents might not seem like they're needed because I have a tough time, for example, believing anybody can think I have an accent, but I know I do. To the people in India who have an accent that makes it difficult for me to understand what they're saying in English. When I speak, I'm sure when I say something like yesterday, they don't even know I'm talking about yesterday because I clip words and I do things in the way I'm used to and they sound normal. Vocabulary and educational level of the person you're talking to should be considered. Specialties in different worlds, as I mentioned before, the aviation world, the marine world, the science world, the business world, the world of sports. Here in the US, many people use baseball or basketball metaphors like he had 3 strikes against him, a baseball metaphor, or it was a slam dunk, a basketball metaphor, meaning it was easy. Translations, especially those that the computer did, are really not dependable and are very suspect. So don't count on the translations to do something for you without double checking it. I mentioned the age of the participants, and I can speak with extra authority about the communication problem of advanced age. Old people do not hear as well as or comprehend as rapidly as young people. And young people, those under 50, talk too fast for old people. We have hearing issues. We don't think at the same speed. When somebody speaks with clipped sentences, by the time we figure out what they were saying, they've already finished the next sentence. The shorthand from social media like LOL and BFF, I won't even get into. Well, I wish for you to have success and a happy life. Remember KISS, WIFM, and these thoughts. Know your audience, whether it is one person or 1,000 people. And when you are the audience, don't be afraid to ask for help or clarification. Most people enjoy helping others. I do.
Leroy, you finished?
I am finished.
And thank you so much. We learned a lot. And before I introduce the next speaker, I'd like to thank the sponsors for the event today, which is Tag Scores. Tag Scores is an online assessments platform which have sponsored this event. And the event is also supported by Premier Consulting and Investigations Private Limited, Premier Shield, India Skills, JMD Cargo, and HubSpot. I would now like to introduce Lieutenant General Sanjeev Chachra. He's a soldier, he's a leader, and he's been a judge. He's a motivational speaker, a strategic thinker, and arbitrator. And he also looks after special needs children in an NGO organization. General Chachra is a strategic thinker and a visionary with broad-based expertise in leading men in operations, human resource development and management, judicial wisdom through legal redress mechanisms, financial planning, training and development advisor with over 45 years of a most distinguished military and judicial career. With high integrity and professional dynamism, the general is known for his ability to envision and create conducive and successful outcomes in complex environments. He is perhaps the only Indian Army general to have commanded two of the largest strategic frontline armies of India, namely the Western Army, protecting the Indo-Pakistan border, and later the Operational Northern Army Command, where he worked tirelessly to bring peace to a turbulent Jammu and Kashmir state while ensuring security of borders with China and Pakistan. After retirement, he became a member judge of the Armed Forces Tribunal, where he brought to bear his intellectual depth and judicial wisdom, coupled with a human approach to adjudicate issues for ex-servicemen and serving our soldiers. He is conferred the highest service award of Param Vishisht Seva Medal by the President of India for his dedicated services to the nation and outstanding leadership to the country. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Lieutenant General Sanjeev Chachra.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Chairman, for such kind words in introduction. It's a privilege for me to be here today to participate in this very interesting webinar. Speaking after two very illustrious speakers, I'm beginning to wonder, what can an army man offer in talking about effective communication, and that too leading to happiness and well-being? But then I look back at 4.5 decades of my service in uniform, leading men in combat and in peacetime, in adverse and difficult situations. And analyze that, I realized that there are two most important attributes that actually made it simple, possible, and successful. One, to communicate, lead, and succeed. And two, I always felt that happy and motivated troops can achieve the impossible. And I shall be talking about both these, drawing from experience in the course of my talk today. Suffice to say, at this stage, leadership is demanding, and military leadership even more so, particularly when there are precious lives involved, in your ability to communicate, in your ability to lead, and in your ability to succeed in any mission that you want to do. I've always believed that communicating unambiguously, one-on-one, and establishing a direct personal relationship helped me in building up my teams. In fact, it helped me all the time to convert any task that I was given into a purpose, and any organization that I was heading, convert them into versatile teams which were motivated and confident in succeeding in their mission. Let me take you back 2,500 years ago, Sun Tzu, and we discussed this with Sheila initially before the talk. In his Art of War, he propounded 3 important aspects on effective communication, and I shall go over them one by one. His first one was, and I'll quote, "If words of command are not clear and distinct, if orders are not clearly understood, the general is to blame." And he then added a caveat and a but. He says, if his orders are clear and soldiers nevertheless disobey, then it is the fault of the officers. And there's a very interesting anecdote behind this, both these theories. When the king read his Art of War, he called Sun Tzu and asked him, would this apply to women? And when he answered in the affirmative, and to prove his point, he collected over 100 women, divided them into 2 groups, selected 2 of the favorite concubines of the king and made them head both of these groups, and started basic military training. But he couldn't make any headway because they were not taken seriously. In fact, the women were mocking him. So he ordered that the 2 concubine leaders of the 2 groups be beheaded. And despite the king's pressure, he had them done and appointed the next 2 leaders, next 2 women as the leaders, and continued the training. There was no problem, and the training finished very successfully. He asked the king, "Sir, would you like to come and inspect the training that we've conducted?" The king declined. And then he propounded his third theory. And I quote, "The king is only fond of words and cannot translate them into deeds." Why have I told you this little story? Because there are 3 most important attributes that actually are important enough for effective communication. 1, clarity in communicating whatever you want to say. 2, ability to translate that communication into execution. And 3, the implementation or execution is guaranteed if everyone understands that communication that you sent up. Let me take you back now to the current times, and I shall take you to Ladakh in August 2020, when the Indian Army turned the tables on the Chinese in August 2020 and occupied the Kailash ranges in Ladakh. I must confess here that I've been away from the scene of action for almost 7 years. So it's just a visualization of what may have happened, primarily to bring about a lesson that sometimes effective communication can bring results totally disproportionate to the effort made. Now, the strategic intent given to the army commander there was, quote unquote, break the stalemate. I will not go into the nuances of this imbroglio in Ladakh and the India-China relationship, because that is a topic for another day. But just to put the topic in a correct perspective, and particularly since there are foreigners from outside countries hearing me, 58 years ago, in 1962, the Chinese had pushed back the Indian army from the heights of the Ladakh ranges in one of the most bitter and bloodiest battles ever fought, in the Battle of Rizangla and the Battle of Gurung Hill, where Indian infantry units of 13 Kumaon and First Aid Gurkha rifles actually and literally fought to the last man and last round, a coinage that actually owns substance to this particular battles. Thereafter, they withdrew back and nothing has happened in the last so many years. In the last 2 years, the Chinese, in their wisdom, have moved forward and occupied some important areas. And despite our best efforts through flag meetings and interactive ministerial gatherings, etc., we were not making any headway. And actually, there was a stalemate. So on the intervening night of August 1920th, in a surreptitious preemptive operation, the Indian army moved in and occupied the Ladakh ranges and then dominated the entire Chinese that were deployed the other side. Totally changed the game, broke the stalemate, and brought them to talks. And as we speak today, and as situations have unfolded thereafter, de-escalation and disengagement has already taken place, and the same process is going on. What I'm trying to bring about is, in this particular incident, two things. One, the postulation of the national intent in clear and unambiguous terms to the army, leaving the nitty-gritties of its conduct, the manner in which it is to be done, the troops, the options, the contingencies, all that to the military leadership, and rightly so. But the second important part, and I want to bring this because it is an important part of our topic, that a success like this brought in euphoria, high morale, feeling of well-being all across the army, not only in the army, but in the nation as a whole. So what I'm trying to say is an effective communication executed correctly brings about happiness. Let me say, and Sheila also emphasized this point, communication is the key. When to say, what to say, and how to say it. And I'll take this, substantiate this with a small experience of mine. I was a young major posted to the Military Operations Directorate in Delhi and overawed by the precincts of the South Bloc in the midst of very top high-ranking army officials, the political authority, the senior administrative authority. I was not only overawed, I was actually very nervous. So sensing my predicament, a senior colleague of mine took me aside and said, "Friend, problems in this place, such places arise out of 3 points. One, not knowing who's in charge. Two, not understanding your commander's intent. And three, your inability to communicate his intent all across to everyone." And I think his advice was well-meaning, and I have taken it very, very strongly all my life. To put it simply, he said, know your boss, understand his intent, and make sure that everybody else also understands it. I've often been asked when I was in the hem that how do I communicate in this entire huge army and 5.5 to 6 lakh troops under you? And how do you make sure that the last man in the hierarchy understands you and is able to carry out the task and the will and the belief that you want him to? Because every soldier has an important role to perform. He's an important cog in the wheel. He cannot and should not be left as a faceless number. Because sometimes, and in fact, most times, these faceless numbers actually become unforgettable heroes and do brave actions and go down in history. Who can forget, and this is for those in India, a 19-year-old boy called Yogendra Yadav carried out one of the most impossible and raw courage operation in the capture of the impregnable Tiger Hill in the battle of, in the Kargil operations. He has lived to tell the tale and is one amongst the 3 living legends in our country with the award of the highest, bravest of the brave award, the Paramveer Chakra. So how did the leadership reach out to him to do what he did? Some will argue and say, well, it's a natural instinct. I would disagree. You can make a great plan. You can have all the wherewithal. You can have all the resources. But if that young officer and soldier does not understand your belief and faith in what you've spoken and what you planned for, it's not going to be a success. So how do I ensure that he has the belief and the faith in what he's doing? Let me try and explain. In the armed forces, we have a very strong hierarchical structure, a formal from the top to the bottom, various commands downwards to the lowest entity of the unit. And today, technology is a great force multiplier with the all-pervasive social media. So the communication system has gone much faster and much better in today's world. But I'm not going to talk about this because this is quite well known. What I'm trying to tell you, more importantly, is that nothing of this technology, this communication system can actually trump the direct human touch, the one-on-one. The good old days when in the battlefield, the commander-in-chief, the king, used to be on an elephant or on a white horse with standards and flags around him, primarily because he had to be visible to entire army, and the army rallied around him whenever there was a problem. This is even today the same. Contact and visibility are equally important. Both have a role, both have relevance. And that is why you find generals moving around to various places, interacting with troops, informally, formally, talking to them. And that is how he gets the pulse of his command, understands them, because large amount of information that he gathers through these informal get-togethers, he would have otherwise not got through because of protocol and discipline and so many other things. I would make it a point to fly out every day at first light to one forward post or the other, to interact, to meet people, to understand their issues, maybe inspire them, but come back with ideas, come back rejuvenated to see them, to having seen them looking so cheerful with such a lot of high morale in areas which are most difficult and inhospitable. A simple endearment in the armed forces like we have, Ram Ram Saab, Jai Hind Saab, Sab theek hai Saab, I'm giving you the language, everything is all right. With an eye contact, gives you lots of information to the discerning eye. But I'm digressing. Let me get to how does you communicate to the last man. In the armed forces, we have something called the lowest operational entity called the unit. It's a family. Everyone has a sense of belonging, a pride in his unit. This unit has history. It has, you sort of have a sense of belonging in this unit. So when you say what drives that soldier to do that impossible task, well, it is this unit. This unit drives him. You have had heroic battles each unit has performed, and so many of them. I talked about the Battle of Rizangla, Tololing, Battle of Hajipir, Battle of Siachen, Battle of Hilli. I can rattle many of them. Each unit has actually fought them and made the historical records in gold, so to say. Now, what happened last year in Ladakh, where the Chinese made a very cardinal mistake of assaulting the commanding officer of a battalion. And the units of that unit, boys of that unit went berserk with anger and caused untold casualties on them. Now that is the commanding officer. The commanding officer is a young man, picked up from one of them and made into the leader of that unit. It's a high selection process, 30 to 40% only make the grade, but he soon becomes a father figure, an undisputed leader, the custodian of the unit's izzat. Every officer who joins the army, and many are in this audience will bear me out, it's a singular dream of every officer who joins the army to become a commanding officer of his unit. And if he's lucky, to lead them to battle. This commanding officer is a selfless creature whose entire focus in life is the well-being of his unit. Many of you would have heard that famous, Nayak Hanumantappa 2 or 3 years ago, and 9 other ranks were buried under an avalanche. The most impossible rescue mission was personally led by the commanding officer. He struggled for 4 days to get every one of them out, including Hanumantappa, who was actually brought out alive, miraculously alive, but of course, sadly, succumbing to it much later. The military ethos of leave no one behind is so much ingrained that, and such a great morale booster, that everybody knows, come what may, I will not be left behind in battle. So some will say that this impossible action was done in moments of passion and moments of emotions. Again, not true. A true leader does not lead by emotions. He leads by logic. He leads by good reasoning. He leads by a sound plan that he has faith in. His men follow him with emotions, units respect, and most importantly, because they have faith and confidence in their leader. So how does this CO communicate with his men? It's a one-on-one, informal, formal, briefing before an operation, after an operation, before a task, after a task, informally. And when he communicates, 3 things emerge. 1, he brings out awareness, information to everybody. You hear it actually from the horse's mouth, so to say. And anything that you hear from the commanding officer is actually gospel. 2, he gives out his orders, he gives out his directions, he gives out the way he wants this action to be completed. But 3rd is more important. He builds an eye contact, he builds a relationship, an informal communication system that breeds confidence, that breeds faith in his leadership. You know, the most effective system of communication in the armed forces is, of course, the salute. Everybody does it, from a senior to a junior. When a junior salutes a senior, he's implying, I am ready to carry out your command. And when the senior smartly acknowledges the salute, he implies, I will lead you till my last breath. That is the significance of the salute. Now, as I said, every success brings euphoria, morale, happiness, and the winning spirit is the highest quotient of happiness, the feel-good factor. And very importantly, it is contagious. I've always felt that motivated and well-trained troops are the happiest. And they are happy when they have a task in hand, when they have faith in their leadership, when they're absolutely confident to execute that. You will never go wrong. What they just need then is a little push, a little pat, a clear direction, and they respond admirably. You will be surprised by the way they will respond in their ingenuity, in their enthusiasm, and sometimes even their audacity. I will, before I conclude, I want to give 3 pieces of advice from my experience on effective communication. 1, always communicate from your heart. It is genuine, it is well-meaning, and it is best understood. 2, there are 2 ways to get a job done. Either you compel or you convince. And a good leader knows how to use both at an appropriate time. One initiates voluntary action, the other forces an action. But there is an exceptional leader who uses neither. He just inspires. And my last advice is that the most important dimension of communication is actually the art of listening. It is only through listening that you can actually understand everybody. You can understand his aspirations. You can understand his way of thinking. You can build trust. So my advice is, start with empathy, initiate a dialogue, and then just listen. You will be amazed and surprised by the kind of overwhelming response that you will get from your command and your men. Thank you. I finished here. Thank you for your time. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, Sanjeev. What a wonderful talk you've given. And, just to sort of start with asking a question, Leroy said, what's in it for me? Which is a very simple thing in the business world that people keep asking, what is in it for me to comply with your instructions? And Sheila, what do you think about it? And what would you say, what's in it for me? Is it a good thing, bad thing?
My thoughts are, most people actually do think, that way. What is it in it for them? But I think, like what General Chatra was saying, that there needs to be sincerity, and sometimes we do not do something because there's something in it for us. The joy actually comes from giving. And that's my take on it. I think you get a lot more joy in giving. Sometimes it doesn't always have to be about you. What is it in it for you? If you can help someone and bring joy to the other person, or you can make another person feel better, I think, that in itself will bring you a lot more happiness.
Yeah, thank you. General Chacha, what would you say about it? You're muted.
I would say that, just in it for me, actually to start with, it's a little selfish. But yes, but if you look at it from a larger perspective, even if it is just what is it for me, if it's a larger aspect, everything that you learn actually gets embedded into you as a element of experience. And whether it actually meets your requirement today or not, it will, as it gestates into your mind as an experience, will actually help you later. So therefore, everything cannot always be looked at from a very narrow perspective of what's in it for me. It will always have a larger gain.
But General Lumba is on their thing. What do you think, sir, is what's in it for me? Good way to communicate, or is it a sense that you need to get? Is it a first point of procedure or a process that you take up? Is it something that everyone should look forward to?
Well, I agree with both Sanjeev and the lady and Sheila. What's in it for me is an extremely selfish and I mean, it's a very selfish way of doing things. If everybody starts looking at it at any job and he starts looking at what is in it for me, I don't think we'll go very far in execution of any task. You have to look at the collective good. And there is that famous saying that if you want to go slow, if you want to go fast, travel alone. But if you want to go far, travel together. So this philosophy of what's in it for me, well, it may be, for somebody who's 70 years old like me, it may be a philosophy for the young yuppies, but I don't think it's the correct philosophy. I agree with Sheila. There is much more joy in giving than in receiving.
Thank you. Jasjit, do you have any question?
Yes. Good evening, General Chacha. I think it was an immense learning for me. Primarily, when you were explaining leadership in the armed forces, your focus was on the last mile connect, which was the unit, and you placed great importance on the CEO of the unit or the colonel of the unit, where you said that he drives by reason and good logic. And so how in a group of young officers in the unit, how does one differentiate when you said 30 or 40% only make the cut, when all these people are actually following the leader and running with great passion? How do you start instilling a sense of balance then? Because purely emotions, like you said, couldn't lead couldn't make you a great leader. So how does that transition take place in the army and across from Josh to Hosh?
It's a good question. There is a very structured way of conduct. A young officer joins the unit. He's bred in. His men teach him what to do. He becomes a platoon commander. He becomes a company commander. He does his courses. He understands. And as a company commander, then he carries out various operations. And he's actually being groomed to be everyone is actually being groomed and trained to be a commanding officer. Now, somebody doesn't get the cut, somebody gets the cut, is a difference between how he has actually groomed himself and taken opportunity of the other. Our aim is to actually allow everyone to become commanding officers. But that is not so because of the very stiff hierarchical and pyramidal structure that we have. But therefore, you select the best, and the best is selected not only from his ability, his physical abilities, his ability of mental planning, his ability to be able to take his entire team along with him, his ability to be able to translate communications into execution, as in smaller levels, at a higher levels. And therefore, he's being judged as he grows up. So by the time he actually reaches the stage of being considered for being a commanding officer, you have a fair idea whether this gentleman is going to make the cut or not make the cut. And not that he doesn't make the cut, he's no longer important. He still has a role to play, but he does not become a commanding officer.
Sir, I have a follow-up question on this. In the armed forces, when physically being to the armed forces, the JCO or the Havaldar or the Subedar plays a very, very critical role. And when a young officer commands over them when he joins the army, could you just explain the dynamics and the communication there? Because, now you are talking to people who are 20 years your senior and giving them orders. So how important does the communication play there? And what are the dynamics there? Because that's what I believe drives the soldiers on the ground.
When a young officer joins the army or his unit, he doesn't go to the officer's mess. He doesn't live with the officers. He goes and lives with his men, actually, for the first couple of months. And that's what good units do. He lives with his men. He does exactly what they do. He passes all his tests with them. He competes with them. And soon the men, the JCOs, the Havaldars, the new non-commissioned officers understand and start understanding his ability, start having confidence in his ability. So he actually emerges a leader by his own strength of character, by his own proficiency. And as he grows up, they start believing that this man actually can lead us into battle. He becomes a platoon commander. Not that the Havaldar and the JSU is not important. They're very important, and he cannot do without them. So they're actually a support staff, like you say in the corporate, but a support staff which actually helps him in actually getting a mission. And it's a mission for everybody together. It's not by himself. The award, the goal, the victory does not go to him. It goes to the unit. It's a collective action that is being done. And therefore, a young officer, as he grows up in service, he actually proves himself through his capabilities that he is actually capable of leading them to battle.
And so just a last question, if I have a minute, how do you translate this into a corporate way of life where, typically people, would say that's a blue collar job, that's a white collar job, that's a gray collar job, because there's no clear distinction. And when people, have gone to good schools and everybody's an MBA and they try to get into the white collar space, how do you suggest corporates take an action so that these young people can actually prove or gain more respect within the organization quickly?
Yeah, this is something that
not possible.
You're right, absolutely. In fact, many institutions all over the world draw out from the military leadership, particularly in the MBA programs. And I've been fortunate to actually go once with the MBA class of 2018 in Wharton, one of the best business schools there. And they go to a place every year. They go to a battlefield site, and they call the term as observe leadership, and where they actually go in to find how enemies of both sides or military leaders of both sides actually face the moments of decision. And these MBA students are actually learning the art of leadership from them. But coming back to the point that you're saying, it is important for that white collar, the young graduate out of MBA, to be able to prove to everybody that he knows his job. And not only does he know his own job, he knows what the other man, the blue collar job who's doing it in the factory, is what he's doing. And therefore his visits to them, his staying with them, his understanding their problems, and he'll be able to grasp what they're doing and be able to improve upon that is what will make him a better leader. Otherwise, he will not be accepted so easily unless he actually has been able to prove himself.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Neeraj, there's a question for you. When you were doing international investigations and you had to communicate what an American attorney would probably want out of another country or a third world country, what were the kind of challenges you faced in those times, and how did you communicate when the communication systems were not as great as they are now?
Well, that's a good question. The biggest problem we had when we dealt internationally was dealing with the different rules and regulations of different countries. And without somebody explaining those to the person in the other country, sometimes you were not all on the same page, to use one of the idioms I talked about. So communication has so many different levels, but the international activity is governed by different rules for the people who are trying to communicate. So understanding the rules of the person you're talking to is probably the key to making things work internationally.
Thank you. One of the things that, Chirag, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Pavan sir, and good evening, everyone. Rather than a question, it's more I'm looking for suggestions from the esteemed speakers. So my request for suggestion was that with the speakers is what tips otherwise you suggest to improve communications in our day-to-day interactions with both team members as well as our customers, our clients. See, while the discussions on a regular basis with these are more pertaining to work, more related to work, and sometimes become more transactional in nature on a day-to-day basis, what tips you suggest that we can include in our conversations leading to both happy and productive discussions with both team members, as Sanjeev sir also said, right from the bottoms up, as well as through our clients and customers. Also, Mr. Leroy shared on the various communication modes that are being used. So while our endeavor is always to speak to both our new and existing customers, is to ensure that they feel important, they are well connected with us on a regular basis with various channels of communication. Anything he suggests to include in our conversations with both these stakeholders in terms of the content in our conversations with them, as well as in the communication modes that we are using. Thank you.
Leroy, would you like to answer this?
I'm not sure I can, because I wasn't real clear on what the exact question was.
Right. So my question is, what tips do you suggest we can include in our conversations on a day-to-day interactions with both internally with our team members, where mostly the conversations is led by work-related discussions? How can we include? What can we include so that these discussions are more happy oriented, more successful oriented, both for our team members as well as for our customers? Because most of the discussions are very focused on the work and more pertaining to that.
I believe I understand what you're asking about, and possibly one of my favorite expressions I use with myself is to live with an attitude of gratitude, and the leader leads by example. If you're having a group discussion and you don't include some motivation toward the way people look at their lives, you're missing the point. They may be having problems that you don't realize. So you have to have two-way communication with them and be very sensitive and open to why somebody might not be paying attention, or because if you're just strictly transactional and you miss the fact that they're going through a divorce or something like that, you probably won't get the results you want. The important thing is to have two-way communication, not one-way communication.
Sheila, you've been dealing internationally with a lot of customers and doing work internationally and propelling your business internationally. What has made you succeed?
Oh, well, I guess success is quite relative, isn't it? I guess for me, when I speak to someone, I try my best to understand what their needs are. Especially in our line of work, people do say there's a lot that's being said, but what sometimes the actual want are, those words that are not being said. So a lot of times people share a lot of information that is good for you to form as, your background information and understand the nature and understand the context of the situation, but that's not what they want. And sometimes it's just, a simple request, but it comes across, as a half an hour conversation for a small request. And once I think you understand that need, I think it's being patient and listening actively and trying to understand what they are. And if you don't, just ask, very gently and let them talk and, engage them in a conversation.
Thank you. How important is body language in conversation? General Chachra?
Very important. In fact, in the armed forces, the body language actually proves the point. You don't even have to convey anything from your mouth. The body language actually conveys everything. And therefore, sometimes the body language has to be made in such a manner that it is amenable to suggestions. When you go and meet your soldier and you put a pat on his back and you're actually asking him a problem, if your body language is not right, he'll never open up. But if you are able to tune your body language in a manner that is conducive for him to respond to you adequately, you'll get a lot of answers. So yes, body language is very important. And in fact, you tune your body language to a situation as it demands.
All right. Thank you very much, Chachra, Sheila, and Leroy. I think it's been a very interesting evening, and we've learned a lot from each other. And I thank you all for Sheila's talk, especially talking of the 7 C's that you spoke of. And Leroy, I learned, WIFM for the first time in my life. And and Sanjeev, you sort of dwelt on the way the army communicates and is able to succeed in battle, and the troops are sort of actively engaged, and it is communication. But what is more important, I've seen in life, and I've seen politically people sort of make a disaster of themselves when they sort of push in communications through Twitter without thinking as to what they are writing. And Leroy, you've been sort of seeing this in your country as to what's been happening. And the president of your country had to be blacked out of Twitter. Uh, how do you feel people should communicate through Twitter?
Please restate that. Were you referring to Twitter?
I'm referring to Twitter as a means of communication, and how careful do you have to be while communicating on Twitter?
Well, I guess with me, I'm not a good person to ask as far as Twitter. I consider it to be a total waste of everyone's time. I am not a person who believes social media has a great future. Social media is more of a waste of time than it is a benefit to anyone. Communication online has great value, but going out and just posting something to see how many people will click a like or retweet your tweet that's the extreme of what's in it for me. People aren't doing that because they're trying to save the world. They're doing that because they're trying to pad their own ego. So as far as Twitter goes, I've had a Twitter account to try and learn how it works and what it's all about. But knowing that the people that run Twitter are really tracking everything I talk about, and there's more in it for them than there is for me. So the way to deal with it, in my opinion, is to just get off of it and stay away from it. It's just another fad.
Thank you. And Sanjeev, what do you think about Twitter? You're muted.
I said, I will go by what Leroy said, just stay away from it, because, unless you are actually reflecting on a particular situation and you want to give a view that is beneficial to all, or an advice that what everybody would gain from, there is no point in just putting something on the Twitter or to say a like or a dislike.
And one of the places where I read was that when you write an email, you must read it twice before you push the
Absolutely.
send button. And majority of the times we sort of write something which we regret later.
Absolutely. It's like a bullet fired.
It's like a bullet fired, it never comes back.
Yeah.
All right. I'd like to thank you all for being with us this evening. And Kamya, can you just sort of put on the slide? I'd just like to talk a minute about the next webinar that we have added. We have the next webinar coming up Friday, the 9th of April. It is managing risks in the corporate world. We have two very able speakers, Jonathan Trimble from the United States and Colonel Chandrawat, who is the head of one of the largest business houses in India. Thank you very much, everybody. And I thank you for your time and for being here with Nisbet on this particular evening. Thank you very much. Thank you, Leroy. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you very much. Very nice being here
Thank
with you.
you, everyone.
Yes. Thank
It
you.
was a good learning experience.
Thank you. Same here.
Definitely. Lovely to meet everyone.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
evening, ladies.